Welcome back to the Entertainment Room, where today I am reviewing a film that is celebrating its 45th anniversary this year, and that is 1979's Alien, directed by Ridley Scott and written by Dan O'Bannon and Ronald Shusett. And as I hope you know, the story follows the crew of the Nostromo, who wake up early from their sleeping pods on their way back home to Earth, and they receive a distress call that they are obligated to respond to, and they pick something up that is beyond terrifying. I'm not going to hide my love for this film straight off, and this universe as a whole. This is one of my favorite horror films, also, from its design, pacing, suspense, just this overall inventiveness. And if it's not my favorite creature design, it's at least definitely top 5. And thinking back, unfortunately, my first memory of this franchise was seeing Alien vs. Predator in theaters. Yes, I know. Tragic. Not what anybody's first memory should be. At least it wasn't AVP Requiem. I guess I'll give myself credit for that. But even then, I knew that that movie was not great despite, I would say, a moderate amount of entertainment value at the time. But what I did get out of it was a newfound love for both of these horror sci-fi icons. Now, I've always been intimidated by the Xenomorph, and despite the full Xenomorph only being on screen in this 1979 film, for 4 or so minutes, there's just still so much more to be entertained and frightened by. So for this discussion, this celebration, I will jump straight into spoilers pretty soon, so just go watch Alien if you for some reason still haven't. It's a must watch, and just don't even give it another thought. I mean, for Christ's sake, it's its 45th birthday. Although I am sure most of you have seen it, and if you have, go watch it again. Then watch Aliens. Then I have no advice from then on out. Make your choice there. But it's past time to get it off the watch list if you have not. So, Alien, 1979. Let's get into it. For this review, I will get into different aspects and moments of the film at various points: story elements, acting, plot, characters. My usual, if you know my style, if you've heard any of my other episodes. I don't always go into depth with special effects and behind the scenes stuff, aside from like brief things that really stand out to me. But for Alien, I just wanted to learn so much more. So for this review, it will likely be longer than my standard length for one film episodes. And I actually want to start with the design of the Xenomorph and the Facehugger. I'll get to the Chestburster, of course, a little later, I think. But from all the movements to the anatomy, the fucking shredded condoms for jaw tendons and all, this creature is fucking horrifying, combined also with its lack of remorse and mercy. And the impressiveness of this design, or these designs, were really ahead of their time. H.R. Giger, a Swiss surrealist and artist, can be largely thanked for the Xenomorph's looks. So I watched the documentary The Beast Within, The Making of Alien, to help me learn more about the process of getting this movie made, and seeing what became the Xenomorph among all these other haunting and concerning illustrations surrounding it. It just really created this admiration for this artist. It's really impressive what some people can put on paper with just their minds, and allegedly a little opium, but with that slide this time. But Carlo Rambaldi, Italian special effects designer, also had a role with our main monster, especially when it came to the practical effects of the head of the Xenomorph. Because what assists with a stellar design is also getting the movements right. And one of my favorite touches with this creation is the absence of eyes, making it feel all the more relentless and cold. Not that it needed another aspect to help its victims and its audience members with promptly shitting their pants, especially back in 1979, but I think it was a smart choice to leave that out. I'm trying to imagine a Xenomorph with visible eyes, but I just can't, and I don't think I want to. Close to my favorite has to be its inner jaw, that disgusting tongue-like apparatus with yet more teeth, and often used particularly this time around as the initial strike that hits its prey. And also the incredible and respectable thing about classic cinema special effects in general is that they were often largely, if not completely, practical. Models, drawings, people controlling some of the most iconic villains, monsters. And in this case, it was Balaji Badejo, who stood around 6'10" or so and was our alien in this stunning costume. Graphic designer turned one time actor, and his thin arms making his fit even more perfect. Who would have thought Tai Chi could be used to accomplish such horrific purposes? Because he really had to learn to slow down his movements, like way down, to assist with this cunning and calculated stalking, these mannerisms. Also, mime work, on top of that, was added to his training. The creepiness of that makes a bit more sense. But despite the limited screen time of the full grown xenomorph this time around, they really took full advantage of what they had, from it dropping tail first from the ceiling to sneak up on Brett, to it nearly holding onto the escape pod successfully before Ripley, of course, blasts it with the thrusters, turning it into low pH stew. And my eyes were just especially glued to the screen, taking in every moment, every movement and action. It's just such an awe-inspiring visual still, to this day. But also about as terrifying in its own way is the facehugger. General groundwork was laid for the idea of this creature by the writers, but again, it was H.R. Giger who does an excellent job with the smaller scale but still harrowing illustration of this hand-like object with oblong fingers, latching onto its prey with unstoppable strength until its natural task is done, if you want to call it natural. But most of us don't do well even with jumping spiders or jumping flying roaches. I just can't imagine dealing with the fuckery that is this little forceful, violating son of a bitch. I guess Kane didn't have much time to react to much of anything in that moment. If you want to try and find a bright side with his outcome. And also, just the intentional sexual design that they went for also adds another layer of discomfort to an already fucked adversary. The eggs also involved a lot of thought. Even the basic idea with Ridley Scott of him wearing gloves and moving his hands around slightly inside the translucent egg to represent a moving offspring, that was really just another phenomenal addition to such an intense build-up. But despite my bias for the Xenomorph, what may be the most impressive creation, or at least very close to it, is that mysterious ship with the huge cave and the space jockey that we get to see more of in Prometheus down the road. But still, for the time, so much attention to detail. Fine care that went into this setting. An idea they had to really fight for the budget for, so they could really drive the point home that this is just not your typical, everyday, low-budget sci-fi film. It took about $400,000 to $500,000 extra dollars to give us some of the best visuals of this project. I think I'll go ahead and move on to story elements and characters now. Of course, I'm not quite done with designs, as like I said, I skipped the chestburster for now, which of course is arguably the most iconic scene in the film, so obviously I'll get there. So we have our crew aboard the Nostromo, awaken about 10 months early, mysteriously, which is already an irritating and ominous realization for them. Plus we get an incredible intro to our surroundings. Claustrophobic, tight, narrow, one of the last places I would want to try and haul ass away from a physical threat. Even if you're an athlete, spin moves, jukes, hurdling will not help you in the slightest, even with a normal human-sized threat. Not to mention these fucking McDonald's play area-ass ceilings. And I can imagine my difficult time navigating this expansive set on its own, just as the actors did at the time at various points. And we get a feel for our characters also. There is no super deep background given on them. Apparently Ridley Scott jotted down some details for each of them, but ultimately wanted to focus more on the situation and the alien. And I am big on characterization in most cases, but I think for the purposes of this film, and what it still accomplishes, I think we get plenty. And too much attention to detail with these characters, like if you gave each character too much background, it really, I think, would have just bogged the whole movie down, which was already nearly 2 hours, as it was. With these characters, I like how Parker just kind of feels like this schoolyard bully type, fully capable and strong, but still. And him and Brett are the prime ones to tease the other crew members, but particularly Ripley, who, of course, is portrayed beautifully by Sigourney Weaver. But with all the bickering, teasing, dick measuring, on top of being kept in these cramped quarters for an extended time, much needed tension is easily built between all of them. Yaphet Kotto, who portrays Parker, was instructed also to annoy Weaver, basically on and off set, to really drive all the tension home. And Kotto at one point also was adamant about changing his character's unsatisfactory outcome, so needless to say, he was a bit of a dick, making Ridley Scott scamper around with his tail tucked between his legs. And also Badejo, our 6'10 alien, was also targeted for some reason as well. Kotto just had a lot of shit to say to him. But of course, an end was put to that when Badejo hoists Kotto up with an ease, like an annoyed father trying to tame his toddler running amok in a supermarket. That kind of put an end to things, and don't get me wrong, rest in peace, Yaphet Kotto. Great actor, great performance. This is not me just trying to harp on him too much. I'll just admit he needed a little humbling at that time. But the tension with Ripley as this apparent outlier in the beginning also seemed to be similar in situation to Weaver off screen at first, from what I've heard. Weaver admitted she felt inadequate in the beginning with the seasoned film actors and their ability to improv. She had had more of a theater background where you traditionally stick to the script, so it just kind of took some work for her to be that convincing hero, I think. And on top of that, she allegedly also beat out Meryl Streep, I believe mostly due to Streep mourning a loved one, although I think most of us can agree that Streep is a great actress, but I don't think she would have been the best fit for Ripley. So I'm glad it worked out how it did, despite the tragedy along with that. And any flaws you may could point out about Ripley or Weaver's performance, I just think they all work with building this character even more, and her building strength, building confidence, again on and off screen. And Weaver likely felt she had a lot to prove. But with Ripley herself, a very strong-willed character, brave, easily offering to do the most dangerous task despite the risk, without hesitation, and she stuck to procedure no matter what, emotion aside, for the safety of as many crew members as possible. And the unfortunate thing was she was not taken very seriously, was she, by her fellow crew members, and at one point she's the only one to stick to that quarantine procedure. And one last thing about this, I think the writers also do a great job in the beginning, keeping that tension fairly neutral between all of the characters at first. I feel like it's not abundantly clear who the true hero is or who the prime focus will be. There are hints more and more, of course, but it's not the Ripley show off the bat, nor is she a perfect protagonist. But none of this is to take away how badass and iconic Ellen Ripley truly is. Obviously she is, but I think this was a great writing choice in the beginning. So the crew gets this distress signal that further derails their already slow journey home, because Big Boss people said they have to investigate it. And Lambert, Kane, and Dallas are the lottery-winning trio who get to come face-to-face with our first threat, Kane in particular. And the whole movie is just masterclass suspense, but this scene in particular is a fantastic intro to all of this. And some films can go too far with this slow build suspense, but then have that just a very small amount of payoff. But I never had that problem with this movie. These slow build moments always led to something exciting. I just think it's beautifully paced, and never knowing when exactly something will happen. This is just a project I wish I could experience for the first time all over again. And I can only imagine 1979, where the outcome and the progression was so unknown, as there was like no reveal, from what I've read, of any of the creature designs ahead of time, so the shock, and even the disgust, was real. I'm never going to be the type to say, I was born in the wrong generation or some shit. None of that. There are moments in pop culture that I wish I could travel to, just go back and be a part of it, and then probably get to my time. Not that things are fantastic here, but it's what I know. This would have been a fantastic original or theater experience. But Kane is the lucky winner of the facehugger's passionate, horny grasp, and he is brought back to the ship. Ripley is all alone and wanting to keep them locked in the entrance for 24 hours for decontamination and further inspection of this threat. And of course, she is met with profound criticism, and Ash just overrides her authority by them all in anyway. And watching that little bastard move still makes my skin crawl, tightening around Kane's neck further when touched. And Kane is also essentially motionless aside from some increased respirations of his chest. And a touch I also loved is that these intruders can't simply be shot and killed due to the little dilemma of they bleed acid, which could eat through the hole and kill them all anyway. The writers just did a great job working out this little plot hole that they were struggling with at first. And also, Ripley goes to confront Ash and reminds him of the chain of command when Dallas and Kane are off the ship, but essentially he gives her the bitch please and brushes it off. The scene with the facehugger disappearing off Kane's face is also brilliant, with the complete lack of musical score and a slow, intense search for it around the room, leading to it suddenly dropping on Ripley's shoulder, deceased, thankfully. And then you get more Ripley as the redheaded stepchild of the ship, as Dallas refuses the relatively sound suggestion to launch the creature out of the ship, because he respects Ash's decision to keep it to experiment on. And that of course brings us to the scene I mentioned circling back to, the chest burster. The infamous surprise not only for the audience, but also the actors. This scene is supposedly only shot twice, couldn't breach Kane's shirt the first time, but then we get the winner with it struggling to burst through, but of course it eventually does. And that struggle honestly just made it all the more creepy, announcing its presence with the most violent, fucked up game of peekaboo, real animal blood also being used, adding, I'm sure, a beautiful smell for the crew, who are not aware of this fact. But I have to say, Roger Deakins did a phenomenal job with the design and the controlling of the most unfortunate birth of maybe the top 10 ugliest babies ever. And then the things scampering away could come across maybe a little dated, I'm sure, but I was still unnerved by the bizarre movements anyway. So they all split up for their tiny search party, and at one point stupidly tell Brett to go looking for Jonesy the cat, who just jump scared them recently to make sure he was all good. But aside from that little bit, I do love this scene in general with Brett. More stellar tension and care with its progression and the sound. I love at different moments you get that heartbeat sound effect as you continue to wait for the bottle to drop, or the big-ass alien to drop. Then the chains and the dripping water was a nice touch with sound in that scene as well as throughout the movie. Then you get the xenomorph who slinks down and delivers the hardest fucking nose boop in history with its inner jaw before snatching him up into the air ducts. We then cut to Parker looking genuinely terrified for the first true time. And a quick sidebar though, the length in the pacing is again incredible. I think the original 3-hour cut would have overstayed its welcome in a lot of ways. And this may be a nitpick, but there are a couple scenes that are left out that made a couple transitions a bit abrupt and awkward. And this transition to Parker after Brett's death is kind of one of them to me, who details seeing the xenomorph take Brett into the air ducts. But we don't see this, it just kind of cuts to him talking about it randomly. And I guess we don't have to see it, but I just felt slightly thrown off by the transition as we never see Ripley and Parker enter the room when he is attacked. But with my behind the scenes research, I know at one point that was actually a scene, because this film initially had an X rating with all the extra violence and the gore, and this included a scene with Brett's death. It was more on screen, but this whole version was just not accepted well either by the audience, by like testing audiences. The other scene I was surprised wasn't expanded on a bit more in the theatrical cut was when Ash let Kane, Dallas, and Lambert back in despite Ripley's orders. And I was surprised with all the tempers flaring that no one got in Ripley's face after they got back in, but apparently that was something else that got cut, as Lambert actually got close and personal, even slapping Ripley before being pulled off. And I do think they could have slid in that short moment in there without disrupting the flow too much. I think that would have been a great moment between the two actresses, especially considering that Veronica Cartwright apparently had to actually slap Weaver for real a few times to make it look more convincing. I mean, just imagine, you get smacked around several times for a scene, and it doesn't even make the cut. I'd be pissed, but, Weaver seemed to take it like a champ. But yeah, some scenes were just kind of cut abruptly, but that really is, I think, just a nitpick of mine. Also, we get Dallas's death scene, which is great also for an even more claustrophobic feel, with Tom Skerritt having to navigate this hot, tight space in the air ducts, with an incinerator as a weapon of all things. Smoke was already utilized throughout the film to give the set this more hazy-ish look, and that already was a struggle for the cast and the crew, and I can only imagine Scarrett's fun here, hearing his heavy-ass breathing and all. Combine that with all the close-ups of the other actors as well to make you feel even more close and just suffocated. And a horror trope I do like with this scene is when you're tracking a character electronically, just on a screen, you're watching them move around, either them or you're just seeing like a dot move around, and you start to see another dot. Seeing this unknown and or threatening signal come and go. Just incredible writing and directing here as Lambert struggles to track both Dallas and the Xenomorph that seems to keep appearing and disappearing. And this leads to a very effective jump scare and a loss of transmission, and of course, with our leader falling rather early on. Next feels like a turning point for Ripley and maybe even Weaver herself, as Ripley tries to take charge. They keep redoing this scene where Ripley tries to devise a plan out loud, while Parker, of all people of course, characteristically gives her a bunch of shit. Ripley trying to find her voice and her authority, and does so, and I just still smile hearing Ripley shout at Parker to shut up. Just a great exchange between the two of them. Probably my favorite homage to 2001: A Space Odyssey, that I believe 1968 film that they reference a lot. But my favorite homage to that was the use of Mother being overridden by Ash, similar to Hal's shift in that 1968 film. And I still get chills with Ripley's conversation with Mother, as she is completely unhelpful with further information, and states that the priority is securing this alien. The crew is expendable. And that twist with Ash is terrifying, as, for one, it was wonderfully acted, but also he is revealed to be an android planted by this corporation to keep their goals as the main priority at all times. He attacks Ripley, but is uppercutted and decapitated by Parker, bringing us to our next grossest design to our alien friends, and that is Ash's detached head spewing this white, milky substance as he's brought back to life, only to discuss the crew's options, which is essentially, y'all are fucked. And this brings me to my favorite Parker moment, which is him just setting this smug asshole on fire. So more and more dread, as this company clearly cares fuck all about this crew, leaving them to die if needed to secure their money project. Typical. They split up again and prepare for self-destruction, and trying to leave via the escape pod. And 2-on-1 with this elongated space puppy proves futile, especially when one of the two is unable to move because she is just too busy pissing herself. Like seriously, Lambert takes 12 business days to decide on fight or flight, and eventually elects neither. And of course, Parker can't take the shot because she is in the way. And this scene also is just a great example of why less can be more, as the finishing blow of these characters is only heard through screams, through the intercom system, followed by a very loud silence. It was just a great editing choice, I think. And this final showdown between Ripley and the Xenomorph is epic, of course. Could Ripley have gotten shit done faster if she wasn't looking around the cat in the carrier? Probably. But she's an animal lover even in a crisis, and leave her alone. You get the flashing lights, the announcements of how much time is left before self-destruction, and you get an occasional surprise glimpse of the pursuing Xenomorph. It replays cautious but swift attempts at departure. And I do agree with the decision of the writers, Scott and even Scarrett, to cut Dallas's true death scene, where Ripley discovers him trapped and cocooned to a wall, unable to be saved, and then Ripley has to put him out of his misery with the incinerator. It's a heart-wrenching scene. It's not a bad scene in and of itself, it's a great scene, but I agree that it would have dampened the intensity and the tension a bit of Ripley's escape. Just not great for that momentum, so I'm glad they cut it for the theatrical release. Next thing, Ridley Scott did fight for a lot for this film, as far as extra things that he could do with it, and I do respect his win for this true final scene, where we get to see Ripley escape, but then we get that shoulder-dropping realization that the Xenomorph made it on as well. And this time around, I knew it was coming, but on my other rewatch a couple years ago, I completely forgot about how this movie ended, and was caught completely off guard, because it's even a great jump scare with that hand coming out at her. And the actual final fight is short, but sweet, as Ripley gets the Xenomorph out, and again blasts it with the thrusters. And the ending, I think, is perfect. Dark endings, like depressing endings, are memorable at times, and sometimes are the best choice, But I'm happy the studio told Ridley Scott no to his original idea of having Ripley violently killed, then having the xenomorph sit and transmit a message using Dallas's voice. It may have been great nightmare fuel, maybe, I can see that, but for one thing, I'm grateful Ripley lives. She earned her survival and is a fantastic character, especially in the next sequel. Also, I think I'd rather have the cold, emotionless, speechless xenomorph. I don't think they need the added ability to utilize somebody else's voice like the goddamn Terminator. So I think it would just come across more goofy than anything, thinking on it more and more. Some other points before my final thoughts. I am invested for sure in films that involve a corrupt corporation, just not giving two fucks about its employees, only caring about money and fame and results. It just makes for a great additional antagonist. In this initial film, you only get hints of this throughout with the Weyland-Yutani Company. Mostly its logo popping up on different items in the ship, and their uniforms, their suits. They clearly only cared about securing the alien and not telling the crew about their intentions, because they wouldn't even tell them what Ash really was. And there have been fans to also add a likely lack of weapons training, and also just some of the poor equipment on board with the cheap looking living quarters. They just did the crew a lot of disservices. And I like that future sequels explore this company even more. And I'm also just in love with the score and how they utilize sound. Jerry Goldsmith was the composer, but ultimately did not enjoy the outcome as much as they changed a lot of his work. I guess some of his initial ideas were either too upbeat or epic, maybe, and I think I'm finding a poor way to explain what they meant when they say they didn't like his style as much. But they did use his style for the Nostromo landing, which I think was meant to be more epic, but typically they just wanted more in the direction of ominous and weird. And I can see why Goldsmith was frustrated, but I have to agree that the soundtrack we get, the score that we get, was the right choice. But overall, Alien is a fantastic classic, more horror thriller than that sci-fi action we get in the sequels, and the change is okay, but I'm happy that the initial project has that more subdued tone, that subdued pacing. It's just a great opener into this universe. And I'm just thrilled it exists. Beautiful design and cinematography. Just a lot of heart went to this first installment in particular. Ron Cobb, with his military background, assisted amazingly with the functionality and the design of the interior of the Nostromo. Then you had Chris Foss with much of the exterior design. Again, just masterclass suspense, great characterization, and story. And this is from a group of creators who largely couldn't care less about sci-fi at the time. I'm just amazed how great they did with the story. And in that documentary I mentioned before, they also kind of criticized CGI and how much it's taken over the film industry. Creators don't always put as much effort and love into these different true set pieces and models, these visuals. And I agree in a lot of ways. CGI can and has looked phenomenal, and it's not all bad. It definitely has its place, but I think a lot of these movies rely on it too much and get too lazy with it, and it can really get you into trouble. And just as an example, I love a lot of Marvel movies. Not recently, but in general, I love a lot of these movies and some of their effects, but they've just steadily gotten worse. It just feels so much cheaper now. But I know that studio interference, just these studios in general, just breeze down the necks of these artists, these creators, these designers, and they don't always get the time they need to craft their true work that they set out to create. They work a lot of hours, I know. They're not always treated fairly. So I am curious to see a number on just how much at fault the studios are for the string of poor CGI. Just how much can it be blamed on the studios, the producers, these streaming services now? I just wonder where the fault mostly lies. I feel like a lot of them just want to keep pumping out that easy, quick content, thinking nobody's going to really care anymore, which is not true. So maybe there's a little Weyland-Yutani in all these large corporations, who knows. But I do miss more practical effects like I used to get. But that's a rant for another day. Happy 45th anniversary to Alien, one of my favorite horror films, and maybe even one of my favorite sci-fi films as well. I meant to release this on the true anniversary date, like back in May, but life happens. I'm happy to get back to it. I'm going to give Alien a 9.2 out of 10. I'm also fired up for August 16th with the release of Alien Romulus, which appears to be taking things back to the franchise's roots, with maybe going back to that single location spaceship battle, which I am excited for, and kind of scared. Please don't fuck this up. But I'll see it anyway, so hope to God it's fucking good. But thanks so much for listening. Let me know how the length and the flow of this review was. I will try and get more reviews out for other anniversary films this year and in future years as well, so stay tuned. Make sure to follow me on my social media, X, Instagram, Facebook. Follow and rate me on Spotify as well, and like and subscribe if you're listening on YouTube. And just follow me if you'd like to hear more and keep up with what I'm doing. Let me know also what films you'd like to hear me review. I'm also playing with the idea, and I hope to get it started soon. I'm playing with the idea of starting a TikTok and putting out more reviews. They're going to be quick reviews, of course, like different lists or like random movies I've watched recently. Just films I am not initially interested in doing full reviews for, or at least not right away. So make sure to follow me on TikTok. Now I put out a post when I do create it and do put out my first few TikToks. I may also entertain the idea of posting them on YouTube Shorts, and I think it's Instagram Reels as well. So overall, just stay tuned. I'm working some things out. But I'll see you next time on The Entertainment Room.